Brittany Montgomery was the living soul of Maple Cafe, in the heart of Charleston, South Carolina. She arrived every day before sunrise, gently arranging the chairs, filling vases with fresh flowers, and brewing the irresistible aroma of the first coffee of the day. She knew the names, the stories, and even the preferences of every customer. For Mr. Morrison, a former Navy pilot, she always brought sugar-free donuts and a kind word. For young Ruby, a literature student, Brittany reserved the corner table facing the street, and a warm blueberry muffin. It was impossible not to be enchanted by her. But not everyone was happy about it. Helen Pearson, the cafe's longest-standing waitress, saw in Brittany a threat to the familiarity empire she had maintained for over 12 years. Where once she received praise and generous tips, now it was Brittany who attracted smiles, attention, and affection. It cut Helen's wounded pride like a knife. She masked her envy with cutting words and venomous looks. Every small mistake Brittany made became an excuse for a humiliating reprimand in front of customers. And Brittany, with her sweet heart and the manners inherited from her mother, endured it all in silence. But her eyes no longer hid the marks of emotional exhaustion. What neither Helen nor Brittany knew was that an attentive gaze occupied the third window table, always seated by a man of silent presence. Alexander Carter, a discreet millionaire, respected businessman, and above all, a man with a broken heart. Since losing his wife in a car accident 5 years ago, he had not allowed himself to love again. He raised little Jonah with the help of his mother, Olivia Carter, hiding his pain behind meetings, contracts, and prolonged silences. But there was something about Brittany that drew him inexplicably. Her sweetness, her courage, the persistent smile even in the face of humiliation. Alexander came to Maple Cafe religiously, without missing a single day. He always ordered the same thing: vanilla cappuccino and a slice of apple pie. It was the perfect excuse to watch her, not with a gaze of desire, but with genuine fascination. He observed how she treated even the grumpiest customers with kindness, her patience with children, her affection for the elderly. Brittany didn't know it, but she was being admired every day by someone who had the world, but longed for a heart as simple as hers. Meanwhile, Olivia Carter watched her son with concern. She knew Alexander was a good man, but he had shut himself off from the world since Amanda's death. Olivia had moved into her son's house to help with Jonah, but deep down she had another purpose. She wanted to see Alexander smile again. She longed for him to find love again, someone who would not only care for him but love Jonah as a mother. And she was the first to notice how Alexander's gaze changed when Brittany walked by. There was hope there, and it made her want to observe more closely. That Friday morning the cafe was busy. Rain fell outside and customers sought shelter and comfort. Brittany, even with a cold, performed her work with her usual care. But a small accident would change everything. Olivia had requested well-toasted toast. Brittany, distracted by orders and a slight dizziness, accidentally burned it. The smell gave away the mistake, and Helen rushed over to provoke. Before Brittany could apologize, Olivia stood up with a furious look. What happened next was the real story's beginning. You can't pay attention to even a simple order? That's unprofessionalism, Olivia said, raising her voice in the crowded salon. Everyone turned to look. Brittany froze. Shame overwhelmed her tear-filled eyes revealing her exhaustion. Helen crossed her arms, satisfied. It was the perfect moment to see Brittany publicly humiliated. But before any cruel word could be completed, Alexander stood up. For the first time, he raised his voice in a public space, and his authority filled the cafe. "That is unacceptable, Mother." The words fell like a bomb. The salon fell silent. Olivia looked at her son in disbelief. Alexander continued, "She works hard. She knows every customer by name. If she burned a piece of toast, it's because she's exhausted. Instead of attacking her, you should be grateful for what she does here every day." The shock was universal. No one expected that elegant, always reserved man to take such an intense stand. Brittany didn't know how to react. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded. Alexander turned to her, gently touching her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Brittany only nodded, voiceless. For the first time in a long time, she felt protected. "Let's get out of here," Alexander said firmly, guiding Brittany out of the cafe. He didn't care about the looks or his mother's reaction. He drove her to his car and silently drove 15 minutes to a quiet neighborhood, parking in front of a modest building. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to reach Brittany's modest studio. She opened the door with trembling hands and he entered, observing the space with care. There were books on the table, a floral blanket on the sofa, and a lavender scent hung in the air. Brittany tried to apologize, but Alexander interrupted her. "You don't have to apologize for being human." He went into the kitchen and made chamomile tea with the capable hands of someone who knew how to care. They sat in silence until she drank the tea, embraced by warmth and his gentle presence. Gradually, her eyes began to close. Alexander stood, covered her with a blanket, and sat for a few minutes watching her serene face. That night, as he left, his heart was restless. All he could think was, "I wish I had stayed with her." That night, driving back home, the silence inside the car felt like it was screaming in Alexander's chest. For the first time in years, he felt something breaking inside him. An ice wall protecting a wounded heart, now melting with the warmth of a tired, sweet gaze. The image of Brittany asleep, her hair loose over the pillow and her hands folded as if in silent prayer, played in his mind like a film. It wasn't pity. It wasn't an impulse. It was something deeper. The discovery that maybe, just maybe, it was still possible to love. On the other side of town, Brittany awoke slowly, realizing she was alone but strangely protected. The tea still warm, the blanket she didn't remember pulling up. The tenderness-filled silence around her made it clear someone had cared for her with a devotion she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, she slept in peace. And in the depths of her soul, a new story began to stir. In the days following the incident at Maple Cafe, something changed in the air. It wasn't visible or tangible, but hovered between exchanged glances, gentle gestures, and silence that spoke louder than words. Alexander returned to the cafe every day, as he always had, but now there was a quiet glow in his eyes whenever Brittany approached. She, in turn, began treating him with a subtle affection that hadn't been there before. It was as if something had been revealed, a layer removed, an intimacy that didn't require touch, only the awareness that one had seen the other in their pain and chose to stay. Brittany brought him his cappuccino with a small drawing on the foam. Alexander left discreet notes on napkins, with words of encouragement or quotations from old books. Both knew they were approaching something new, but neither dared to name what they were building. Brittany Montgomery was the living soul of Maple Cafe, in the heart of Charleston, South Carolina. She arrived every day before the sun rose, lovingly arranged the chairs, filled the vases with fresh flowers, and prepared the irresistible aroma of the first coffee of the day. She knew the names, the stories, and even the preferences of every customer. For Mr. Morrison, a former Navy pilot, she always brought sugar-free donuts and a kind word. For young Ruby, a literature student, Brittany would reserve the corner table with a street view and a warm blueberry muffin. It was impossible not to be enchanted by her. But not everyone was pleased. Helen Pearson, the cafe's longest-serving waitress, saw Brittany as a threat to the comfort empire she'd maintained for over 12 years. Where once she received praise and generous tips, now it was Brittany who attracted smiles, attention, and affection. It wounded Helen's pride like a knife. She masked her envy with cutting words and venomous looks. Every tiny mistake Brittany made became an excuse for a humiliating rebuke in front of the customers. And Brittany, with her sweet heart and upbringing from her mother, endured it all silently. But her eyes no longer hid the signs of emotional fatigue. What neither Helen nor Brittany knew was that an attentive gaze occupied the third table by the window, always taken by a man of silent presence, Alexander Carter, a discreet millionaire, respected businessman, and above all, a man with a broken heart. Since losing his wife in a car accident 5 years earlier, he had never allowed himself to love again. He raised little Jonah with the help of his mother, Olivia Carter, hiding his grief among meetings, contracts, and prolonged silences. Yet something about Brittany drew him inexplicably. Her sweetness, her courage, the persistent smile even in face of humiliation. Alexander came to Maple Cafe religiously, never missing a day. He always ordered the same: a vanilla cappuccino and a slice of apple pie. It was the perfect excuse to watch her, not with desire, but with genuine fascination. He observed how she treated even the grumpiest customers with patience, how she cared for children, and showed affection to the elderly. Brittany didn't know, but she was admired every day by someone who had the world, but yearned for a heart as simple as hers. Meanwhile, Olivia Carter watched her son with concern. She knew Alexander was a good man, but he had shut himself from the world since Amanda's death. Olivia had moved in to help with Jonah, but deep down she had another purpose. She wanted to see Alexander smile again. She longed for him to find love again, someone who could not only care for him but love Jonah as a mother. And she was the first to notice how Alexander's look changed when Brittany walked by. There was hope in his eyes, and it made her want to watch more closely. That Friday morning the cafe was bustling. Rain poured outside and customers sought shelter and comfort. Brittany, even with a cold, performed her tasks with her usual care. But a small accident would change everything. Olivia had requested her toast well done. Brittany, distracted by orders and a slight dizziness, accidentally burned it. The smell gave her away, and Helen seized the moment. Before Brittany could apologize, Olivia stood with fury in her eyes. What happened next was the real beginning of their story. You can't even focus on a simple order. That's unprofessional." Olivia cried out in the crowded cafe. All eyes turned toward Brittany. She froze. Shame overwhelmed her, her watery eyes revealing her exhaustion. Helen crossed her arms, satisfied. A perfect moment for Brittany's public humiliation. But before any cruel words could follow, Alexander stood up. For the first time he spoke strongly in public, and his authority filled the cafe. "That is unacceptable, Mother." His words hit like a bomb, silencing the room. Olivia looked at her son in astonishment. Alexander continued, "She works tirelessly. She knows every customer's name. If she burned a piece of toast, it's because she's exhausted. Rather than attack her, you should be grateful for all she does here every day." Shock swept through everyone. No one expected that elegant, ever-reserved man to defend her so fiercely. Brittany didn't know how to respond. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded. Alexander turned to her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Brittany simply nodded without words. For the first time in a long time she felt safe. "Let's get out of here," Alexander said firmly, guiding Brittany from the cafe. He ignored the stares and his mother's reaction. He brought her to his car and drove 15 silent minutes to a quiet neighborhood, parking in front of a modest building. They climbed 3 flights of stairs and arrived at Brittany's modest studio. She opened the door with shaking hands, and he stepped in, taking in the space tenderly. Books sat upon the table, a floral blanket adorned the sofa, and the scent of lavender filled the air. Brittany tried to apologize, but Alexander interrupted. "You don't have to apologize for being human." He went to the kitchen and prepared chamomile tea with skilled hands that showed he knew how to care. They sat in silence as she drank the tea, enveloped by warmth and his gentle presence. Gradually her eyes began to close. Alexander stood, tucked the blanket around her, and watched her resemble a portrait of serenity. That night as he left, his heart was restless. All he could think, "I wish I had stayed with her." That night, driving home, the silence in the car felt like a roar within Alexander's chest. For the first time in years, he felt something breaking inside him, an ice wall protecting his wounded heart, melting in warmth of a tired, tender gaze. The image of Brittany asleep, with hair falling across the pillow and hands clasped as though in silent prayer, replayed in his mind like a film. It was neither pity nor impulse. It was something deeper. The discovery that perhaps, just perhaps, love was still possible. Across town, Brittany woke slowly, alone yet strangely protected. The tea still warm, the blanket she hadn't remembered pulling up, and tender silence around her made clear someone cared for her with a devotion long forgotten. For the first time in ages, she slept in peace. And deep within her soul, a new story began to awaken. In the days following the Maple Cafe episode, something in the air shifted. It wasn't visible or tangible, but hovered in shared glances, gentle gestures, and silences louder than words. Alexander returned every day as always, but now there was a restrained glow in his eyes when Brittany approached. She, in turn, responded with a subtle tenderness not there before. It was as if they'd peeled back a layer, revealing intimacy that needed no touch, just understanding that someone had seen their pain and chosen to stay. Brittany served him cappuccino with a tiny drawing in the foam. Alexander left little notes under napkins, with encouragement or old book quotes. They both knew something new was forming, but neither dared put a name to it yet. It was on a lazy Sunday, with the scent of cinnamon and fresh bread in the air, that Alexander woke up earlier than usual. He walked into the kitchen where his mother, Olivia, was slicing strawberries for breakfast. "Are you going to see Brittany today?" she asked casually, as one might about the weather. Alexander smiled. "I am. Jonah wants her help building a pillow castle. He only accepts her as the official architect." Olivia chuckled softly. "He's smart. He already knows how to recognize someone worth it." The two exchanged a silent glance. Since Brittany began spending time at their home, the spaces felt larger, more vibrant. Alexander's sadness still lingered, but it was now accompanied by something new, a feeling he was no longer ashamed to name. It was love. Not idealized love, but real love. With fears, pauses, silences, but above all, truth. At Brittany's place, the same preparation was underway. She wore a light dress, tied her hair back with a blue ribbon, and held the small pot of daisies that Jonah had given her weeks before. She was blooming, and that was exactly how she felt, blossoming. For the first time in years, she saw herself looked at with care, touched with respect, loved without demands. But like every woman marked by abandonment, there was still a voice inside her asking, "What if it doesn't last?" She didn't want to lose everything again. She didn't want Jonah to grow attached to her only to be to lose her. She didn't want Olivia, now so close, to see her as just another illusion. But then she thought of Alexander's eyes, how he always listened to her soul, how he held her hand firmly without squeezing too tightly. And there, between doubt and hope, she chose to keep showing up. He chose to try. Because he was worth every risk. That afternoon, something simple and profound occurred. Jonah presented a new drawing. A little house with a garden, a swing, 2 adults holding hands, and a smiling child between them. "It's our happy home," he said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Brittany looked at Alexander, who gazed back with uncontainable tenderness. Olivia, folding napkins in the kitchen, watched in silence with tears in her eyes. In that moment, everyone understood without needing words. They were already a family. No papers, no rings, no formal invitations. There was already bond, belonging, and a love built in the details. In a favorite soup, laughter in the garden, silence shared during the rain. Later, while Alexander helped Olivia take out the trash, Brittany and Jonah stayed in the living room assembling the promised pillow castle. At one point, the boy looked at her and said, "If you leave, my heart will fall apart." And that broke something inside her. The fear of hurting that little boy outweighed her fear of rejection. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm not going anywhere." It was at that moment that Alexander walked in and saw the scene. He said nothing. He simply knew, with a rare certainty. He wanted to grow old with her. She was the one deserving to be called home. In the days that followed, Alexander began planning something in silence. He didn't want a traditional marriage proposal. He wanted something born from who they were, something meaningful to their story. He thought of rings, fancy dinners, but it all seemed small compared to what she represented. Then he remembered something she'd said weeks earlier. My dream was to open a flower shop that also served tea. And that was when he knew exactly what to do. He began seeking quietly a small spot downtown. He spoke to architects and decorators and bought rustic second-hand furniture. He commissioned a sign, Florist de Dentro by Brittany. And at the back of the shop, he prepared a table for two, with the same tea mugs they shared in her studio. Every detail spoke of her. When everything was ready, he took Olivia and Jonah to the location and revealed the plan. Olivia was speechless, tears flowing freely. Jonah shouted, "It's Bree's shop. Is it really real?" Alexander laughed and said, "Yes, but there's still the most important part." That night, he wrote a letter to Brittany. No excessive poetry, just truth. "I don't just want to share coffee with you. I want to share silences, walls, children, Sundays. I want to build and rebuild with you. And if you say yes, this will be the first brick of our happy home." He delivered the letter through a florist, with an invitation to meet him at the new address the next day at 6 p.m. When she read it, her heart raced. She cried alone on the couch, laughing through the tears. It was his. It was hers. It was theirs. And as the sun set over that small town, setting the scene for the most important chapter of their lives, Brittany walked toward the flower shop, unaware that she would find not only flowers, tea, and promises, but the new beginning she never imagined she'd have. And you, with your heart racing now, leave in the comments what you would do if you were Brittany. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because episode 7 is going to be a proposal like you've never seen, and it's going to make you believe in love again. The clock read 5:48 p.m. when Brittany arrived at the small shop's door. The golden sign reflected the sunset. Florist de Dentro by Brittany. She paused there for long seconds, as though trying to believe it was real. Her hands trembled. Her heart seemed to stumble in her chest. She held the letter she had received from Alexander, folded and unfolded so many times the creases were nearly tearing the paper. She breathed deeply, gripped the pot of daisies she'd brought as silent thanks, and pushed the door open. A bell tinkled softly. The scent of lavender and chamomile immediately enveloped her like a hug. And then she saw. The shop was a poem. Vases of sunflowers and lavender arranged delicately, books stacked on low shelves, linen curtains filtering the golden light. The back a table for two. Mugs identical to those used in her studio. And beside her him. Alexander waited standing, wearing a floral apron, smiling at her expression. "I tried to look casual, but maybe I overdid the floral," he joked with a shy grin. Brittany laughed, but her eyes were already brimming with tears. "What is all this?" she whispered. He approached slowly, took the daisies from her hands, and placed them in the center of the table. "It's a place, but also a promise," he said. "The first of many I want to make you." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a handwritten note. "You gave me peace. Now I want to give you roots. Will you marry me?" Brittany covered her mouth with her hand. Tears streamed without restraint. But it was not sadness, it was relief. It was joy so beautiful it hurt. She didn't respond in words. She simply ran to him and hugged him as though launching into a safe place after years in a storm. Alexander gathered her into his arms and felt the whole world align. Everything he'd lost, everything that had hurt, everything that had kept him distant, made sense now. Because true love isn't the kind that comes without pain. It's the kind that arrives and heals even what seemed impossible. They held each other in silence for a long time, until Brittany looked up and said, "Yes. Yes, with all my broken parts. Yes, with everything I've been through. Yes, because I finally found my home." And the kiss that followed was more than a romantic gesture. It was a covenant between souls. Minutes later, Jonah burst into the shop, holding a paper flower. "Dad, Bree, I brought the missing flower." Alexander lifted him into his arms, and Brittany took the flower. It was made from pages of a school notebook and read, "Our family." Olivia entered right behind, discreet, eyes brimming. She saw the three of them embraced and said nothing. She only smiled. And in that moment, she understood that her purpose was complete. She had carried her son's grief for years, but now she could give him back to life. Olivia approached, hugged Brittany and whispered, "Take care of them as if they were yours, because they are now." Brittany held her tight. 'Cause they were. 'Cause she was. In the months that followed, the flower shop became a refuge for the town. People from all over came to have tea, buy flowers, and hear love stories among the shelves. Brittany tended plants with her hands and hearts with her gaze. Alexander stepped back from part of the business to embrace their new life. Jonah grew up happy, calling Brittany "my flower mom," while making drawings for customers. And Olivia, she became the shop's storyteller. She sat in the back with her cup of tea and told whoever would listen, "It all began with a burnt toast. And look where we are now." And everyone smiled. The wedding had no pomp or expensive dresses. It took place in the shop's garden, among daisies, lavender and smiles. Brittany walked in holding Jonah's hand while Alexander waited beside the table where it all began. They exchanged no rehearsed vows. Alexander simply said, "I promise not to save you from anything, but to hold your hand while you conquer everything." Brittany replied, "I promise never to run away when it hurts, because love lives where we choose to stay." And so, with tearful eyes and steady hearts, they sealed what the world tried to prevent, but what fate protected with tenderness. A love planted in the ordinary, yet bloomed like a miracle. And that night, as they danced barefoot on the shop's wooden floor to an old song only they knew, Alexander looked at Brittany and said, "Life began again when you saw me." She smiled, forehead pressed to his, and replied, "And I saw myself when you loved me." Outside, the street lights flickered. Inside there was peace. It was the end of a cycle of pain, and the beginning of an eternity woven from simple things. Hot tea, intertwined hands, and a child's laughter among flowers. And to every customer who walked in and asked, "What's the secret to this place?" Brittany answered with a gentle smile, "It was made with love. Love that took time. That was healed. That learned to stay." Because the true miracle was never the flower shop itself, but what it represented. A new beginning. A yes after grief. A home born from so many endings. It was where Alexander healed his absences, where Olivia finally found rest, where Jonah made memories, and where Brittany understood that nothing was in vain. Everything had led her there. And if you've made it this far, with your heart full and your eyes brimming with tears, leave a comment saying, "I believe in love." And if this story touched your soul the way it touched theirs, subscribe to the channel now, turn on the notification bell, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that love, the real kind, still exists. Because sometimes, it all starts with a burnt toast, and ends with an entire garden blooming on the inside. Brittany had already noticed a few changes in her body, but she had been attributing everything to accumulated fatigue, the emotions she had lived through in recent months, and the intensity of the love that had been blossoming between her and Alexander. But that morning, while arranging some flowers on the small balcony of the apartment she now shared with him, a sudden dizziness made her lean against the wall. Olivia, always observant, watched from a distance, furrowing her brow with the look of someone who knew more than she let on. Without making a fuss, she suggested Brittany see a doctor, just as a precaution, while handing her a cup of mint tea with a subtle smile. Brittany hesitated but agreed. At the doctor's office, the sound of the heart monitor was interrupted by absolute silence. The doctor smiled gently and turned the screen toward Brittany. "Sweetheart, it's 2. Brittany's eyes widened, her lips parted soundlessly, and her hands instinctively covered her belly. 2, she whispered, her voice choked. "Yes, strong heartbeats. Twins." Her heart raced. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or run to tell Alexander. She left the doctor's office as if walking on clouds. The world felt lighter, more meaningful, and also more terrifying. Alexander was in the kitchen, distracted, making waffles for Jonah when Brittany walked in. Her eyes were glassy, but there was a new glow in them. She approached slowly, holding the envelope with the ultrasound against her chest. Alexander smiled when he saw her, but his smile faded when he noticed her expression. "Is something wrong?" he asked, already concerned. She didn't answer. She simply handed him the envelope with trembling hands. Alexander opened it carefully, and when he saw the images, he frowned for a second, until he understood. Then his eyes widened, his mouth fell open. "Twins," he murmured. She nodded. A huge smile, full of tears, spread across his face. In that moment, Alexander dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her belly with reverence, like someone listening to a miracle whisper through the skin. "They came from love, Brittany," he said, his voice breaking. Jonah, curious, ran over and hugged the future mom's legs. "I'm going to be a big brother?" he asked, his little eyes sparkling. Brittany laughed through her tears and pulled him into her arms. "Yes, my love. And you'll have twice the work." Olivia, watching from the doorway with a dish towel in hand, let out an emotional sigh. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry out of pure joy. In the days that followed, the house filled with plans, laughter, name lists, and baby clothes that Olivia sewed with the same care she once had for Alexander. Brittany's little belly grew, and with it, a peace that Alexander never thought he would feel again. At night, he lay beside her and spoke to the babies, telling them stories, making promises. Brittany watched him with teary eyes, certain that this was the man with whom she wanted to build an entire eternity. At Maple Cafe, every customer heard the news. Many cried, others toasted with hot chocolate, and even Helen, the former rival, now looked at Brittany with silent admiration. The sweet waitress had won everyone over, including fate itself. And now she walked with steady steps, eyes on the future, hands resting on her doubled belly, where two tiny hearts beat, cradled by a love that was reborn where no one expected it.